Welcome to the Revenue Rewired podcast, hosted by StringCan Interactive's visionary CEO, Jay Feitlinger, and no-nonsense COO, Sarah Shepard. We're here to accelerate your revenue and give your marketing purpose. All right, hello and welcome everybody to this week's episode of the Revenue Rewired podcast. We're all caffeinated and ready to go today, aren't we, Jay?
Number 3 coffee, so I'm ready to rock and roll.
I'm scared. You guys should be scared because Jay doesn't drink coffee, so we'll see how today
My
goes.
hands are shaking. It's all good.
That's normal.
Sure, thank you.
Well, today's episode we're really excited about. We have a fun little conversation planned for you all, but you're being catfished by your forecast. And if you may or may not know, Jay comes from a sales heavy background, and so our motto at StringCan anyway is marketing's job is to support sales. And we really take that to heart in our agency. But, having a sales background, I think, is something rare and special for us to bring to the table as marketers. And what's funny is in my notes, I was like, okay, the whole pipeline being real conversation is it a fantasy? And man, I do love fantasy romance novels. I have no shame in admitting that. I am part of the multi-billion-dollar industry of romance novels. My goal of reading 40 books this year, yes, half of them will be romance novels. I might look like a smart girl in my Kindle insights, but I am
You call
not.
them romance or smut novels?
Well, now, it could be
Sorry.
both. It could
Very
be
judgy
both.
today. I apologize.
It's all good. It's a family affair. But, what should not be fantasy is your pipeline. And funny enough, I love you to pieces, Jay, but there's
Aw.
also like this level of eternal optimism that is dangerous in pipeline situations. And your pipeline should not be part of the fiction section of the bookstore.
Great.
And I think, as this episode's going to come out toward the end of Q3, and a lot of people are going to be thinking about their end of year pipeline and, planning for the next year. And this topic, I think, could not be more timely. And Jay, I know you probably have a nice rebuttal to the whole fantasy pipeline conversation, but part of being a salesperson is that it's hard. So you have to have some level of optimism, right?
I mean, again, it's, obviously the world has changed a lot when it comes to sales. I'll never forget my first true job in sales. And, I was measured on how many cold calls I made. And, after, doing 100+ cold calls and being hung up on, and having really no progress being made in a day, you have this combination of, gosh, I'm not going to hit my goals, so I'm going to be off of my compensation. And then also, as a very competitive person, and it's never fun to be on the bottom of the leaderboard when you look at the rest of your team. And so, from a optimistic perspective, that's probably one of the reasons why, I have that challenge still where it's just not fun being overly negative and just feels like that sometimes. And so I think, any opportunity you think that you potentially could close, I think sometimes on the sales side, we treat it with that rose-colored glasses a little bit too much sometimes. And obviously, I love when me and you have had these chats over the years where you do a really good job in a very nice way, usually, not always, but a nice way to kind of help me feel grounded and really challenging me on how realistic is or not, because I know that you and other people in your role at our clients, you rely heavily on these forecasting numbers. And when quarter after quarter, it's 25, 50% off from what you thought it would happen, I know that, that must be really hard for you for planning purposes. So I think being aligned with the operation side of the company, understanding how it impacts, the planning process has really helped me, I think, get a little more honest when it comes to forecasting, not only for us, but also having those conversations with our clients.
Yeah. And I know we have the three CRM lies that we see that perpetuate this problem. And one is like the definition of qualified. And sadly, 80% do not move beyond a meeting. which can be frustrating. I think this ties into we've had conversations about how many touch points, in our cold email podcast, but that is a hard pill to swallow. And, the likelihood of actual close, that's another lie because a lot of this is gut information. It's
Hmm.
not standardized, I think. And then making sure that, to your point about the deal size, like realism, is it accurate? How did you come to the estimate? And I think a lot of those tie-ins to those three lies has to do with the structure and standardization of what your sales department um, has for themselves as definitions. And maybe I'm wrong, but activity does not mean progress. Like I heard on this one podcast, they were talking about momentum, and it's not the same. So if you're rocking in a rocking chair, that is not the same as rolling in a wheelchair. One is just movement, and one is progress. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting visual.
Yep, I agree. And the third one, I only heard two.
Oh, well, maybe well, I'll be more specific. Is that so number one was the qualified 80% do not move beyond a meeting. Number two is the pipeline
Got
probability.
it.
And then three was that the estimate of the deal size is
Got it.
accurate. And I don't know, you were talking about like our clients too, um, and having a quote phantom pipeline, which is kind of like the ghost handoff. What what does that even mean?
Well, I think we did, I'm not sure what number it was, but we did one episode a while ago about ghosting. And, again, I think over the years, the issues that you brought up, and I hate using the word lies, but I think that's probably appropriate. I don't think, to be clear, that a typical person in the sales department is intentionally doing that. Again, it's just you want to show to your organization that you're working really hard and you're making progress, and the deal, forecasting is really the main metric, especially with people that aren't working closely with you, and how they decide if you're performing or not. And so I think that, the word lie could be a little, harsh, but I think it's very smart to word it that way because I think it's going to really force people to look in the mirror and be like, okay, how realistic is this or not? And I know from my point of view, I try, and I know a lot of our client sales teams try really hard to put in what you believe is the most accurate information in the system. But the problem is back to that ghosting comment you made is there's just so many variables in play here that can significantly impact things. For example, one of our clients recently had one of their largest ever possible deals in their pipeline, and they emailed us and they were so excited about it because if it closed, the ROI on it would have been like 12,000% because it was a massive deal, and the prospect showed insane interest on that discovery call and checked every box of the perfect ideal client profile and their needs. But then something happened, and either that opportunity company they were going after, maybe their situation changed, or maybe that person was changing roles, or they maybe had a really bad quarter and they were doing a massive layoff. You just never know what's going on internally in a company before someone signs the dotted line for the contract. And, unfortunately, from a sales perspective, you don't want to come across desperate, but it's just so beyond painful when, you or like the roller coaster ride, you get in a call and someone's like, oh my gosh, everything you're saying is exactly what I need. I'm so excited, X, Y, and Z. And then we definitely want to move forward. I'm going to present this to my team and get sign off and let's get going ASAP. And so from a sales perspective, you're like, oh my gosh, that was an amazing call, and then you put it in and high probability, and then you never hear from that person again. And it's just so beyond painful when you have kind of that no movement situation. And that's really, I think, the hard part is, if you don't really have a strong relationship with that prospect, that's where I think it's really hard. And I have to say, one of the things that I learned in many of my, sales training that I've gone through, but the one that I was most impressed by was when I worked with HubSpot, and they've done a really good job with this process. And I found it a little annoying, but they wouldn't even give me an offer until after about the third meeting. And when I really looked into it and talked with some of their executives about their sales process, it was very intentional because they found that if their salesperson rushed the opportunity to enter into the deal flow too soon before they've had, more than one conversation, you have to really think about that probability percentage in a different way. And so I think there's a lot of those situations going on that just makes it really hard from the sales side when you think about that phantom pipeline situation.
Yeah, and you know what makes it harder is being a B2B business with the extended sales cycle. And I think not only is your internal system having to adjust, but you're having to adjust to external stimuli and situations and environments that are still unknown. Like we all have a lot going on in the economy, and being able to plan for that is so much harder despite us having more information and data now than ever. But sales cycles, it's no secret, B2B sales cycles have always been extended, but now they're like I think we're hearing like up to 18 months in some cases, like depending on the deal size. Obviously, the bigger the deal, the longer the cycle. And so how do you adjust your pipeline to have accuracy when you could have months in between conversations, or like, and maybe it's like a little bit of a philosophical conversation too with your sales team, where you and I had talked about how you incentivize your sales team is also really key. But this could be one of those opportunities. Are you incentivizing just activity, or are you incentivizing progress with your prospect? And I
Yeah,
think
and
a little bit of that ties into the cold email thing we talked about too, where bring value.
I agree. And you made a great point. It does support that whole back to the three, CRM lies. That one you just mentioned, I think, is a huge one on the tracking activity. Again, it could be really tough, especially now in the world we live in, where the cold calling process. A lot of companies don't even do that anymore. They rely heavily on cold email, and I think that is another problem. Is especially for the C-suite. When they're popping on the dashboard, they often are looking at, okay, well, this, the sales rep we have on our team hasn't really hit their goals in a couple quarters. What's going on? And typically the first thing they look at is the activity, how many calls, how many emails, how many meetings have they had? And they're not thinking about it from that buyer progress perspective, to your point. And I just feel like you cannot build a revenue strategy on activity metrics and just hoping and praying that the results are going to work out. If you don't have, as part of your process, understanding the buyer's progress towards, again, officially saying yes, that's where I think you have a really big challenge in place. And so I think as the world is changing here and rapidly speeding things up, I think the sales team needs to think about it more from, the signals the buyer is giving on the progress they're making through that process to make a decision. I think that is probably a lot more important nowadays than how many calls or how many emails did you receive from that prospect. Because as we all know, you might get 30 emails from a prospect and be like, my goodness, based upon the number of questions they're giving, this is a very strong opportunity to close. But unfortunately, there's a lot of bad people out there, and for all you know, they're just shopping you and leveraging you to help get a better deal with the true company they want to go with. Or maybe they're trying to make a business case where a lot of larger companies, as we know, especially the more enterprise you get, they often have rules internally where you have to get at least three bids. And so I think it's just a really tough situation because until you have a strong level of trust and a relationship, which obviously is hard with complete strangers, it's like how much faith and trust can you have in that process without really understanding exactly what's going on behind the scenes.
It's funny you mentioned that because when you talked about a bunch of emails or a bunch of questions from your prospect, my thought process was, ooh, why didn't we have enough information ahead of time to answer some of those questions? Like that seems like a lot of work for the prospect. And to me, that shows a failure point, or maybe more like a friction point in marketing, that we didn't do a good enough job of educating, or there could be like a one pager, or how could we make this less painful? Because that is, in my operator brain, that was not a good sign. And so I think
True.
part of that is, where are you measuring the impact? And talking about CRMs and making that like a better source of truth, to your point, we've talked about vanity metrics a bunch. This almost feels like a really ripe opportunity for metrics that are also vanity metrics. I know marketing gets hit with that phrase a lot, but I think sales does too, where number of calls, number of emails, like what is that yielding? What is that? I've been doing this a lot lately. Like a question I want to ask, what is it that I'm looking for from the answer? Is this the best question to ask? And we did that whole podcast on questions. And it's really made me think every week since we've done that episode, how am I living by that? And this is one of those areas where, um, is engagement actually turning into seller activity? Are we helping this prospect move through the process seamlessly, or are we creating more friction that even though we had maybe 50 emails back and forth, they completely ghost us and our pipeline has this huge phantom deal in it and we don't know why they dropped off? Well, I feel like you could look back at some of those emails and probably get the answer. And maybe I'm crazy, but
No, I
I
mean you're
feel like,
not. I mean, and just again, it's much easier to talk about this, but when you apply it to real world, especially when it's near end of month or end of quarter, and as a sales rep, you need that one more deal to help you get over the minimums you need to earn the compensation you're looking for. But I think again, the larger the company and or their sales force is, the more complicated this gets because there's a significant gap often between the actual person doing the sales and then the leadership team. And so I think here, which obviously is a big theme that we talk about often, on our past podcast shows around the whole, quantity of leads versus quality. And, what I have found around this whole process of how do we make this a more honest system is that when you think about it from the point of view that, most sales teams don't need more leads. They just need better truth about the ones they already have. And that's where I think, part of our, flow audit that we do that's been super valuable for our clients is taking a deep dive and looking at maybe the last quarter as far as like what are the stagnant deals and figuring out why. Because often what we find is there's this element of fear, and again, I have a strong empathy, as you know, Sarah, with, salespeople where I just know how hard it is, where, they can do thousands of cold emails and they could do hundreds of cold calls and this the no after no after no, it really starts beating up your confidence. And you just need that one win just to get you back on track. And so I think from a culture perspective, if the company is setting up the system and their culture in place where the sales team don't feel threatened that they're going to lose their job if they have a bad month or a bad quarter, there's always opportunity for learning. That's where I feel like people are going to be a lot more honest about what's going on. And if you look at, all of those deals that have been sitting there for, you know, 60 to 90 days, I think it's worth the due diligence to really ask the hard questions regarding when's the last time you actually had an engaging conversation with this contact. And if the answer was a month plus ago and they're not responding to, voicemails or emails or whatever, and they went from a 9 out of 10 likelihood to close to now down to a 2, then I think you need to adjust your forecasting because it's very likely that deal, might be dead. But maybe there's a part of your pipeline where you have a different process in place on those stagnant opportunities, and that's where I think the sales team needs help. Where it's like as you're diving into it, the intention shouldn't be this passive aggressive mindset of I'm going to go through all of your deals and challenge you, and the sales rep feels defensive. Instead, it should be, look, I'm looking through your pipeline and I noticed these 4 deals that are pretty stagnant. What can I do to help you? And I think if the sales rep feels like someone has their back and you can look into, is it a challenge of we didn't ask the right questions, that person, we sped things up too fast, we really didn't truly understand their pain points. Was there some kind of collateral they asked for? Have we listened to the actual past calls and provided some coaching? There's just so many opportunities in place between process and people that I think you can cover some significant opportunity to have a more honest system in place.
And that's really like the point of what we're talking about is you have a system in place. and it's just not being optimized in the right way. And I think, I mean, to be fair, CRMs are a lot of work when they're done right. And we're finding too in this really AI driven space we're in right now, data is key. And CRMs are really the holder of the most amount of data besides your internal systems that your company could possibly have. And the less trust you have, even just in your CRM and pipeline system, it trickles out into every space. And, you know, being able to have improvements in your forecasting accuracy is really driven by, you know, garbage in, garbage out, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we're going to say that probably 800 more times, and we should probably put like a disclaimer like we'll be annoyed by this episode, but our third point is creating some sort of revenue intelligence system. And honestly, I think it can be easy if you take the time. And that's where a lot of us get hung up in. Our day to day is just so busy. It's so easy to go on autopilot. All the stuff you and I talk about, we say it's not rocket science. It's not, but it requires like moving mountains sometimes. You have to get out of this habituated way of working and living and leading and focusing on the things that are causing pain points and problems. It's like when Rob and I talked a couple weeks ago, he's like, you have a hurt tooth and a broken ankle. What are you going to fix first?
Mm-hmm.
And I think just making the decision and taking some discipline to focus on that, it really can create momentum. And it's helpful, I think, for leaders and CMOs, CROs to hear this and say, you have permission to pause and pivot. And I mean, you and I have done that on multiple tactics within our own marketing where we were ready to just scrap the whole thing and thought, let's back up and look at our assumptions about the data. What is the data telling us and where is it coming from? And it's been really eye-opening. And I don't know if you've felt that way or if it's too granular for your big
No,
old visionary brain.
I definitely did. Again, it's for me, and I think, again, my chats with you and the team have really opened up my eyes because, when we looked at, for example, like even our own business the last couple of years and analyzed, okay, let's just look back for a second in the rearview mirror and what was the accuracy we had on forecasting. And again, and I'll take the full blame for this, I would say 5+ years ago, for the first 10 years of our company, the accuracy I had on forecasting was probably 30 to 40%. And I know that probably was really painful for you as you were doing planning. I think over the years, I would say confidently we're probably closer to 60 to 75%. I think that's one of the fun metrics that I love when we have this conversation where I'm always about let's move forward. And I love how you do a good blend of looking at forward, but also looking backwards because it helps me understand where I have some opportunities to improve. Um, because I think that's where I think the opportunity is so huge. And back to your garbage in, garbage out, maybe we need to have Waste Management sponsor our podcast. But on the input clarity part, the way my brain has really shifted over the years, and I found that our clients love when we talk about it this simple is you almost have kind of a very simple statement for every deal you enter into the CRM. You want to be like, evaluating solutions for what is the problem with what is the budget and then what is the date they're planning on making a decision. If you can at a simple level per deal answer problem, budget, and date, I think right there you have a potential big issue around the clarity side or the confidence you have, on the forecasting. And that's really
Hmm.
where I think we've offered a lot of value to our clients is when we talk with individual sales teams and then the leaders over the sales team, we really understand, okay, sales needs to focus on what are the winnable deals and then providing the data back into the system so marketing can optimize the campaigns for lead quality. And I think that's where I think there's such a huge amount of opportunity. Again, if the culture is in a healthy way, where sales and marketing could be so much more aligned, which then results in a much more accurate forecasting for the organization.
Yeah, and I think, it's like a trust fall or like a domino effect too of marketing is leading with a high trust into the sales. Sales is having high trust and accuracy. And finance then trusts sales and their predictions, because finance is actually a lot more flexible. At least I would hope so. To be a good finance person, I think you need to have a level of flexibility. And I really credit Sandy with helping me understand that budgets need to be flexible, but they can't be so flexible that you can just have that same approach with your pipeline and forecasting. I feel like there has to be, and unfortunately, again, we put sales in the middle, right, between marketing and finance, but it's one of the most important jobs. And, hoping they feel supported by both sides is where you create this revenue ops department where everyone is really in lockstep, and driven toward the same outcomes, which are better outcomes with less effort. Higher revenue, less effort. Let's just oversimplify it in that way, and using your forecast to help you make better decisions on both sides of the coin. And you've got your CRM in place. And so
Hmm.
taking a hard look at that and maybe re-standardizing, it's a great opportunity to retrain your sales team. Like there are so many things you could do off of just maybe doing a quick audit of some of the stagnant or stale deals. And one of the things I think you and I love doing is, what was the last successful deal, or like the biggest deal? What did we learn from that? Where can we
Hmm.
replicate those types of activities or conversations, and, do a little bit more positive reinforcement? I feel like sales is always ripe for negative reinforcement. And as humans, we're just wired that way.
Yep.
Um, but I think that would probably be my biggest takeaway is find some positive reinforcement and take a look at your data and just be honest. It's bound to change, be flexible with it, and try, and a little bit of accuracy improvement will be a lot in your pipeline.
I agree. I think, to your point, there needs to be a constant feeling of, as a team, we're going to learn from each other, and quarter after quarter, we're going to make improvements. So we're all going to have better success individually on our sales compensation side, and then helping the various departments hitting their goals, which obviously then results in the company making more money. And then really kind of everyone's happy. But I think it's like there needs to be someone responsible for, again, diving into the data, as long as the data is accurate. And then, working with your teams on figuring out on a department level and an individual level, what can you do on providing training? So things like, teaching disqualification early. Again, as you know, we've had the situation happen to us numerous times where we got on a call with, a potentially great client opportunity. And then we do a really good job with putting our clients through a kind of an internal, decision filter. And if we don't have extreme confidence that we're going to be able to exceed their goals, then we probably aren't the right fit for them. And I think, we'll then, say, hey, after talking with you all in our team, we just don't believe that we're probably the best partner for this opportunity, which unfortunately makes them, you kind of want to work with us even more, which I think is not intentional, but it's kind of hysterical how it's similar probably to dating, I bet. But I think there is like, if you could do a really good job with your team and focus on what your company does best, and don't try to force round peg square hole in with every single deal, I think everyone in the company is going to do better off, because as we all know, if the salesperson's amazing and can find a way to close a deal, but that deal becomes a huge headache for the customer service, and operations and onboarding process, it doesn't do anyone a good job having to deal with those headaches. And so that's where I think there's a lot of opportunity here to make the company run more efficiently, if you're looking at it from that kind of perspective on, what are the stagnant deals, and then also looking at the deals that did close and figuring out the good and bad of all of it from that kind of retrospective perspective.
I love it. All right, Jay, I think this was an awesome episode, and we're going to
Love it.
let you all have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you, Jay. Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Sarah. Thanks, everyone. All
Have a great day.
right, bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Revenue Rewired podcast. Send us your questions to podcast@stringcaninteractive.com and follow us for more insights to drive your business forward.